All right. What's going on, my freaks and geeks? Welcome to the Square Round Table podcast. I'm so happy to have all of you with us tonight. And thank you so much for following us on our journey and tuning in to all of our awesome podcasts every week, guys. And of course, tonight is nothing different. We actually have a very special guest with us tonight. This guest has appeared on multiple podcasts of ours just through word of mouth. We've talked about her work numerous times. So really, this is an honor that we actually get a chance to speak. So without further ado, guys, please give a warm Square Round Table welcome to author, Vice President and Associate Provost for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion, and the Ida B. Wells and Ferdinand Barnett Professor of Communication Studies at Northwestern University, Dr. Robin R. Means Cole.
What's up?
What's going on? What is going on? But like I said before, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I can't believe it. So thank you. You were very gracious with replying to my email, just everything. We're putting everything together. And the one thing you were talking about is just having fun. So that's what we plan to do. We're
Yes,
going to have a good
I
time.
appreciate that. What we do, what we talk about is fun. And it's
It is.
sometimes serious business. I guess we'll get into that, but
Oh, yeah.
we definitely keep it light too.
Yes.
Oh, and there is nothing wrong with that at all. And we're going to jump into a bunch of it. But we always do with all of our guests. We just love to do a mental health check first, because that is always important, because everything has been going on like crazy for the past couple of years. Everybody's getting back outside again. So we just want to know, how have you been doing? How's everything going with you?
Oh my gosh, am I supposed to cry at the start of the podcast? I'm good. I swear I don't think somebody's asked me that for a year.
Oh wow.
Oh wow.
Yes, I
Oh,
love
wow.
this. This is amazing. So I'm good, and now even better that you asked, and we get to hang out with each other this evening. So it's good to be seen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes. Awesome.
That is a very fantastic. And yeah, we just like to check on our guests to make sure everything's okay, because that often happens. In my research, when I'm preparing to talk to people, I see that a lot. You'll have somebody on the show and they just jump right into it. Don't even ask how the guest is doing. So that's something like we love to do here.
Yes.
But
Most definitely.
oh yeah, one of the major things I wanted to jump into, and just to let you know, Dr. Coleman, I really appreciate a lot of the work that you do as far as talking about inclusion and the way Black actors and actresses are represented in media. I think that's very important, because representation is everything. But we want to kind of get into your background a little bit and know, like, for you growing up, what was media like through your eyes, and what interests you in getting into the field of inclusion and making sure that your people were being represented fairly and just.
Oh, wow. I love this question. I think if you asked me this question tomorrow, I might answer it a different way. But today, in October, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And for those that know that history, in and around Pittsburgh is where Night of the Living Dead was filmed.
Yep.
1968, George Romero
Yep.
he's putting Night of the Living Dead in the trunk of his car, driving the film
Mm,
cans to New
Yep.
York when he hears that Dr. King has been assassinated.
Mm.
So having that film as kind of the backdrop of you growing up, that in Sesame Street,
Yes.
is impactful, along with kind of the history of Black Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's a segregated city, but listen, I felt seen and empowered by what was happening from like the Hill District, the Negro Leagues, even that Night of the Living Dead was set in Pittsburgh. We thrived in particular ways against a structure that didn't want us to thrive, but we certainly were a community, and I wanted to see that richness, the diversity of Blackness represented in media.
I like that. I
Yeah.
definitely like that answer. And I definitely come from a place, personally, I'm pretty sure Marcus and Demetrius, you feel the same way, just being people that are doing really great things in your particular areas. Like, for instance, Demetrius in education, Marcus in film, and even you as well, Dr. Coleman. And when I do a lot of interviews from time to time, I'm in the area of health sciences. One question that I'm always asked is, how did I feel about my representation growing up and seeing Black scientists in the media?
Yeah.
And the truth, besides seeing, like, you might see Back to the Future or things like Bill Nye the Science Guy, things like that. And in media, I thought that was a job for old white men. And truthful, and they were around because you have guys like George Washington Carver, of course, Garrett Morris, guys like that. But even in school, my teachers didn't really attach the nomenclature of scientists to these people.
Yes.
And so I just didn't see it until I got much older. But specifically in media, and I promise, Dr. Coleman, this isn't going to be a one-for-one podcast about your horror noir film, but I think that we can't really talk about the beginning of Black representation without mentioning Oscar Micheaux and Spencer Williams, because one of the things that you bring up in your film,
look who did the homework.
Yes, look at you smiling. You're like, what?
I'm like a proud big brother.
He did the assignment and did all the readings, right?
Look, I try. But the one thing I didn't know and that I learned from the film was that they had one of the first representations of women in STEM. And that's crazy. And this was, when did this film was, what is it, the Son of
Ingagi?
Yeah, Son of Ingagi.
Go ahead.
It was like, I'm sorry. It was like, because it was based off of the original one that was like really just bad. And when I saw it, I was like, come on now. Like, like, we doing that? Like,
I feel like, Chad, you're on to something that's really powerful. So the question is, why weren't you seen? Why weren't, quite literally, your discipline? What happened? And this is the crux of why we study media and why media is important, why representation is important. So in early film, 1800s through really the late 60s, Black people are technically showing up in these sort of scientific spaces, in labs, but they don't see us as contributory. They don't see us as intellectuals. They don't see us as having an ability to engage in research and reasoning. And so we show up as the comic relief. We show up as the folks who tear the space up, like drop beakers and mess up experiments and do all of these sorts of things. So it isn't, sometimes I go back and forth debating absence versus presence. And what represents Chad in these early films, and frankly, it's far too late, I would say even into the 70s, what you really are like is, okay, I would rather have not been in this movie. Now, if you're going to do this
I agree.
to us, then maybe you could have just left us out. And so you see these, especially the atomic age films and all of that, where Black folks show up to do this sort of wide-eye wonder about, y'all sure is doing something interesting with them beakers. That kind of...
Yeah, when they don't know much. They're like, it's like, oh, that's cool. Whatever. They're like the background characters. They're the ones that kind of like gas up the scientists. Dude. They're like, oh yeah, like you said, you're doing all the fancy stuff with that science. I know nothing about that. Come on.
But then you've got to think, and I see you smiling, Marcus, because you know it's coming. Then you have to say, so why do that? Why not do erasure? What purpose does that serve? Because you have a choice. You can leave us out completely, or you can put us in there and have us looking crazy like a fool. And Marcus, I know we're connecting here. You know why they do this. It is to set us up as deficient, as deviant. So it's not enough to erase us, but no, we're going to put you in there and we're going to punctuate this so that people have no doubt in their mind the feeding of that prejudice, that racism.
Come on now.
Look, listen, come on, bring it, Marcus.
That's exactly what it was. They want to show you in that media. So everybody around the world and country itself, when they see, if they've never seen or experienced our culture or anything, that's the first thing they seeing, and their perception is already, hey, also this is how they act. Oh, this is why they call them A, B, C, D. This is why they can't do this. And that perception it dragged out for so long. Like you said, even when we got to like the 70s and the 60s, yeah, we was getting the Sidney Poitiers and we were getting the I can't, names are leaving, Donna Summer and
Ozzie Davis,
like Ruby Dee, we was getting them, but it was like
Harry Belafonte.
Yeah, and it was like, yeah, they were powerful, but it's like you still felt it was missing. It was almost like, yeah, these roles are good, but you still tell it's a standard that they have to go by to do it. And like I always say, I always appreciate everything they did because they set a bar for us to even like slide in the door. But you could even tell like they were like, no, this still ain't it. Exactly. But they had to do that for us to get to where we can get to and still try to get above. So that's why I started smiling because I was like, hey, somebody get it.
There's somebody else smiling. Demetrius, I see you.
Oh, yeah.
Come on, Demetrius. You're not going to let Marcus preach a whole sermon on this. Come on now.
It's just because when I was watching the movie or watching the documentary, I learned a lot more stuff. And like when I like talked about when I thought about Black exploitation, I wondered and questioned if it was like I understand what it did for us and got us there, but was it like I don't know how to explain it, but like I see the positives and the negatives of that, and I'm like balancing my like kind of mind on whether it's like a I don't know how to explain it. You know what I'm trying to say, Marcus? Kind of.
No, I got
you. Like, you know what I'm trying to say. Like,
me and Chad are going to help you out. Chad, do you remember Rudy Ray Moore?
Yeah, Rudy Ray Moore.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, love Rudy. Now I think
Dolomite.
Dolomite is my name.
Of course.
So Rudy Ray Moore, Chad, you remember this. You remember Dolomite and all of those movies. So Rudy Ray Moore says about blaxploitation, Demetrius, oh, we call it blaxploitation when we show up, when we're kicking A, when we're empowered. So suddenly it's blaxploitation, right? But when we were getting our A kicked, I don't know if this is a family show or not, so you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Then it was fine, but suddenly when we're showing up as Shaft, as Dolomite,
Black
as
Dynamite,
Cleopatra Jones, right? Then it's blaxploitation. Chad, you remember this era of movie making?
Oh yeah, no, I think so too. And it was like one thing my dad mentioned about it because I had no idea Rudy Ray Moore, and my dad was like, "Yeah, dude, that's like Black superhero, man. You gotta check that out." And one thing we actually you covered as well, or one thing that you actually talk about, Dr. Coleman, that I think is interesting, while we're on the topic of sort of representation and the functionality of that representation, whether it's progressive or regressive. I would love for you to share your thoughts about the Norman Lear era of Black sitcoms, because we had that representation, but I just wanted to know from your perspective, since it didn't come from us, did you think that we were more caricatures or that it was letting people into the Black homes as we say it was?
That's what I was trying to think of. That's
Go ahead, Demetrius.
No, you worded it the way that I was trying to get to. Like that was my question. I just couldn't formulate it. But thank you, Chad. You got me.
I got you, bro.
Marcus, we're still smiling because Chad did all of the homework.
Man,
he
look,
didn't just do one.
Yeah,
you don't know, like I preach like film and TV and all this to these guys because I studied it so much. And to hear those words come out of his mouth and say what he just said, I'm telling you, I feel like a proud big brother right now. I'm speechless. He got me speechless for the first time about film. I ain't gotta say nothing.
Okay, so what you're getting at is, and I like the way you said progressive versus regressive, right? Because it's more than that kind of, oh, here's a stereotype, there's a stereotype. That's old. We know that. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but we get it, right? So the question is, what do these representations do? Do they function in a more either robust or problematic way? And what does it mean? Because you asked about Norman Lear. You didn't ask about the Wayans or Robert Townsend or the comedian we no longer talk about who had all the shows that were named for him.
That guy.
That guy. Or Debbie Allen. And when she rescues a different world, all praises to Debbie Allen.
Yes, all praises. Yes, amen.
So the question is, can Blackness come out of the imagination? Whole and full Blackness come out of the imagination of someone who's outside of Blackness? Now, I'm not making an argument that like for segregation or anything like that, but what you do with Tim Reed, with Frank's Place, with Debbie Allen is the whole and full representation, treatment of Black history, life, and culture. Now, Norman Lear had popular hit shows, and the audience was, it was for Black folks, but it also carried along non-Black folks a lot. Black shows have the Black audience in mind. They come out of the Black imagination. You, if you're non-Black, you might get it,
Yep.
but you might not. A great example of some of that humor, the writers who wrote for the sitcom Rock.
Oh yeah.
Some of the jokes in Rock, if you revisit that, if you not Rock wasn't just for Black folks, you needed to be black for Rock. And some of it was black from the 70s. There was jokes about high-heeled sneakers, and people were like, what are you talking? There was a whole interpretation that needed to happen for Rock. Rock is funny. The Bernie Mac show is funny. And it is deep into the culture. Now, what I'm going to say might be controversial for some, because Blackish is a Black sitcom, but understand how Blackish functions. It lives up to its name, and particularly the opening kind of credits. It defines the, like, our, whatever our latest like code word is. Here's the definition in case you don't understand it. Now we're going to lead you along in this episode based on this definition, and we're letting you get a peek behind the curtain. Some Black shows don't do that.
No,
not at all.
They don't really walk. They don't hold your hand through it. You gotta know. I guess one of those shows you just gotta be about it.
Right, because maybe this isn't for you.
Exactly.
Because it's for us. So in a lot of ways, both the way I talk about horror, but also sitcoms, is that there's Blacks in horror, where we show up and we're parachuted in, but it's not really for us.
Yeah.
Versus like Candyman 1992 versus 2021 Thing, which I really loved, which I think was really good, but that's still Blacks in horror, right?
Yeah.
You show up, there's a couple of characters, they get killed, one might live, and it's a super big deal. Even Night of the Living Dead was Blacks in horror.
Yep.
Yeah.
Both on the sitcom side and the horror side, there is a difference. There's a resonance, a different feeling when it's all.
I like that. I like that thought process. And one thing that I've been struggling with, and this isn't just even with shows that are representing a certain race. These are shows that are representing ideology, shows that are representing sexuality. And I just look at it as a thing to where, how do you represent without making a stereotype? I was looking recently, and I'm not sure if any of you guys watched this show or not. There are two separate shows about main characters that are homosexual men. And one is a show called Uncoupled, and the other one is the movie Bros. And one of which is about a guy, and I've watched the whole series. One is about a guy that just happens to be gay. He goes about his life and he's just a gay man. And one is about, this is a gay movie about gay stuff, and we're all, and it comes off that way. And a lot of the reception to the movie, even with people in the LGBTQ community, hasn't been great. And I think
you're talking about Bros in that instance versus Uncoupled in the other instance. So here's what I would say across the board. So we are getting more sophisticated. Even it's no longer pitting us against them. So I think if Norman Lear was writing today, he would be, and remember, he did some seriously woke stuff, right? He was dealing with issues, some tough socio-political issues that were coming up in Black communities, and it helped that the settings, the things that were happening around you in LA and Watts and all of these sorts of things. So I get it, right? It was elevated comedy in a way, until then we get the focus, for example, in Good Times on JJ, and it overshadows what was supposed to be happening about really powerful, smart socio-political commentary. We see these cyclical trends. I'm getting a little bit off topic, but I want to get this in because we see it happen again and again. And what JJ did was have a son named Steve Urkel. Family Matters was supposed to also be this kind of, it was a different kind of Cosby, right? This Black family who was more working middle class.
Yep.
So not quite the Evans, not quite the Huxtables, somewhere in between, along that 227 vein. But then we didn't learn our lesson, right? As powerful as those sitcoms were, what we learned from the Lear era, we couldn't be All in the Family. We then had to turn it into the Urkel show. And so those things happen because we continue to listen to the sort of the wrong audience response. There was an audience response that gave rise and birth to JJ when he wasn't supposed to be the center. There was an audience response that gave rise and birth to Steve Urkel when he wasn't supposed to be the center. And in both of those cases, the audiences weren't us. Nobody asked, and then here we are. So I just wanted to get that in. So I think if Lear was writing today, those lessons would be learned and we would be doing better, because you do see us doing better. I think Brooklyn Nine-Nine is a good example of where you see better writing. And then here's the rub. You have to have diversity in the writer's room. This isn't just about what's going on in front of the camera, but you've got to have diversity in the writer's room. And that diversity is, yes, around race and ethnicity, but histories and experiences, regions of the world. You have to have that.
Yes.
Or else what you put in, a single-minded, monolithic thing, is what is going to get spit back out. And we're not going to love it.
Yep. Oh, man.
Yeah. I agree
Demetrius,
with that.
come on. You agree with it. What do you agree with?
I agree. Oh, sorry. I agree with what you said about having diversity in the writing room, because you can definitely tell when there isn't diversity in the writing room. You can definitely tell how the characters are. Going back to what you was talking about with Rhodes versus, what was the other show you were talking about? Or the show?
Oh, Uncoupled.
Uncoupled. One of them probably didn't have a lot of diversity in the writing room, and so it came off as stereotypical what people who are not gay people would think about gay people, versus one where they were having that diversity and stuff like that. So you could tell that those people actually really cared about getting the story out there. They did the work to put out the story in a right way, so that they were careful not to offend the community that they were trying to represent, which is something that doesn't, I would say, happens every so often. It doesn't happen a lot, in my opinion. Which we need to work on getting more diversity in directing and the writing,
Come on now.
behind the camera, in every different facet, because we're getting tired of seeing the same old stuff where you can tell that they're not really caring about minorities and sexualities and gender. They're just like, oh, this is something that's a cash grab. Put it out. Let's put out these things. And not really caring about representing. And it feels hollow. You can tell.
Yeah. Come on now.
I like it.
Y'all are preaching entire sermons. Come on, go ahead, Marcus. Come on in.
Because I was gonna add to that, because for me, when I think about that, I always think about, I heard Denzel Washington say something, and it sticks with me. Everything he really says sticks with me, but this one I love, because I put it in this like situation where, of course, you got two great directors. You got, let's just say, Martin Scorsese and Spike Lee, right? Of course, both of them could probably direct in different genres. But Scorsese couldn't direct Do the Right Thing, just like Spike probably wouldn't be able to direct like Goodfellas like he could. And it's because Denzel uses culture. And he said, when it comes to culture, you can be another ethnicity and you can type, okay, they took the hot cone, they put it to the head, they burnt it. But if you black and you writing that, you can break it down to the, when you feel this, and you can steam, and like, that's why that's why it's so important to have that diversity in those rooms, because those people can get you to stuff like that. You can write it all you want, but nobody knows the experience. And that's why we lose a lot of that and a lot of things we see. And I wanted to add to what you were saying about certain shows, Dr. Combs. One of my favorite shows when I was growing up, and still is now, and probably was the first time I really saw like pretty good representation of us, was Living Single. Because my mother, she worked in like corporate America when I was young. She worked for like Bell South. So she had friends that worked there and there, here and there. So I was used to seeing like black women act like that. So when I saw it on TV, I was like, oh, they like my mom and her friend and my auntie. And it was cool because like I was like, okay, finally some representation, because I couldn't relate that much to Fresh Prince. I couldn't relate to the Cosby Show. I can relate to Family Matters, but I really couldn't. But when I saw that, I was like, I might not be grown, but I understand it because I see my mom and her friends. And that's why stuff like that, those shows still last even till today. And they're so important because you can put that on with whatever, I don't even know what, Scandal or something. Even though I ain't saying Scandal isn't good, but you can put it on and it's still like here because it's relevant. It's that's Black people held up. So I just had to add that to what you were saying. Yes.
Chad, now don't let me and Marcus continue to bond, because now Marcus has done talked about Bell South. Marcus, my father is a lifelong, just recently retired bellman.
Oh, wow.
They Bell to Verizon. So I actually have several family members that worked at Bell, but that's
awesome.
Bell folks. Marcus knows how that Bell culture.
Oh man, it's something different.
It is.
My mom still
but
talks
it's authentic,
to me. Yes,
right?
Yes.
Because that's what this is about, right? It isn't just about media as separate from the lived experiences of Black folks, but there's such a diversity of our lived experiences, and we want to see that. And with all of these streaming services, all of these networks, there's got to be space for us. Where is that? Like you said, Marcus, it wasn't the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, it wasn't the Cosby Show for you, but then there's this huge range that's been untapped. Now, Chad, I know you have another question.
You see it on my face?
He was waiting for it.
Oh, no, I just wanted to just play off of what you all were discussing, because the reason I even brought it up in the first place is because I've just been so obsessed with labels lately. Labels have just been something that I paid attention to in media, because you have, like I said, your shows just about certain characters, and you have your shows that say, hey, this is Blackity, for instance, and they let you know what the point is, right? Our last podcast that we had before this one, we were having a conversation with a horror author, Brandon Massey, and we were discussing certain aspects about different types of horror that's been made lately, particularly pertaining to African Americans. And that's one thing I wanted to get your opinion on as well, is like, as far as how we represent Black people in media, especially in horror, we've been getting a lot of course, everybody loves what Jordan Peele is doing. It's amazing. Oh, yeah. We love that. But then you bring in other things like what Little Marvin has been doing with them.
Man.
And we get a lot of, it's very divisive. A lot of people have labeled it torture porn and trauma porn.
Trauma porn.
And I'm just like, and I want to get your perspective on those stories have that validity, especially because they do come from Black people. How did you feel about people like Tyler Perry as well? He gets a lot of divisiveness for his shows and his creativity, but it's also coming from a Black person. But at the same time, he's putting a badge on it as, this is what it is what I'm doing, this is what you should expect. So my thing is that validity lessened because it might be, what's the word, kind of playing to a certain archetype. Like he has Medea, that's his thing. He does a lot of content as far as dealing with African-American women and troubles with African-American relations and things like that. And as far as Little Marvin, like I said, he wants to tell a story about what the real horrors of what African-Americans have gone through. So with this type of divisive media, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about that?
So these are always questions. Like I said, if you ask me tomorrow, I might have a different answer. But what I would say is I think it's interesting, and we rush by this a little bit. The question is, I study genres, right? Media genres. And my two claim to fames right now are sitcoms and horror. And those are not far apart. And so what's interesting about the study of genres is, first you think there are these boundaries. Are you talking about what fits here? What is a sitcom? What is comedy? And what fits here? What is horror? And what's the definition there? And those guardrails are interesting because it's orderly. It's the ways in which we move through our lives. And I'll get to your sort of torture porn, trauma porn question, and that to say that what's interesting about genre study is not just how we categorize our lives, how we categorize things that we view, how we make sense of the world. But then it's also what's really interesting is when it blows up, right? When we disrupt those things. So to your question, Little Marvin was talked about as trading and trauma porn, but it wasn't just Little Marvin. It was also Ava DuVernay with When They See Us. They were talking about a trajectory of media offerings that felt too much. 12 Years a Slave, Bellum. It was all of these things. And so each one of those is drama, is horror, is somewhere between like dramedy. So what you saw as somebody who studies genres to say, okay, but somebody's making connections across these. Somebody is blowing up these genres and saying, there's another kind of red thread that's running through, and right now it doesn't feel good. It feels torture porn or trauma porn. It feels like our stories might be a little bit too confined, too limited at this time. And I think it's important that at this time, because now we were, good Lord, the number of police murders. And we're just talking about recently, because police have been murdering Black folks since we were brought here.
Exactly.
That was the whole, and getting it, that was the whole point. This was these extra legal murders that continue to go on. And when that trauma porn discourse comes up, we're still right in the thick of that. And it feels like it's too much, because it is too much. And then what is supposed to be entertaining or edutainment is blurring another genre, which is our real life lived experience. So you're seeing it on the big screen, you're seeing it on the small screen. And Breonna Taylor reminds that you can't even lock your door and be safe from that, safe from what's happening when we walk outside of our door. So it was surrounding us, and there was a fatigue about it, and I get it. And at the same time, horror in particular promised, by definition, the definition of the genre said, I am going to leave you sitting in discomfort and fear, because that's what horror does, right? That's, if you're going to show up to the genre, that's like, I'm telling you, we do discomfort and fear. And then you get discomfort and fear, right? And you're like, I got discomfort and fear. Look, I told you this is what I do.
That's what you're getting.
So that's what horror does. But I also get the fatigue around it. And I also get that part of it is about the medium it shows up in. Binging them is very different than watching Get Out. Right? Diet of 10 episodes of just the most horrific violence. That's a lot. Versus going into a movie theater knowing you're setting yourself up for about 2 hours. That's the contract, right? Of something that is a little bit more comedy horror, right? It's not so much. So I think that horror got a bad rap in that because it delivered exactly what it promised to do. What it is. And at the same time, I think that the dramas, like When They See Us, is difficult. But I saw somebody who, I love to quote Michael Gaines, who's a scholar, and he was talking about Nia DaCosta's Candyman. And he said, Nia DaCosta, let me get it right, she didn't deliver the film that we wanted, but the film that we needed. And I think that's where we're at with many of the sort of media offerings. Sometimes it's the stuff that we need to see. We think we want something else. We think we want it one way, to quote The Wire, but it's another.
Yeah. Oh yeah, most definitely.
I like that because it's so, like I said, it's such like I said, it's one side or the other. It's like people are like, okay, we talk about it a lot on the podcast where we're just like, okay, we want to see a character that's not completely defined by just their race, a character that just so happens to be this. They're progressing in the story, the narrative is fine, and they're just a Black person, or they're just, but like you were saying, both of those stories are valid and they definitely need to be told. So I can agree with that. It's completely necessary. So in a world that, oh, were you about to say something, Marcus?
I was going to say that Nanarive Due, who is in Horror Noir, really good friend. Horror Noir brought us together, and Tanana Reeves teaches the course The Sunken Place at UCLA that Jordan Peele famously showed up in.
Oh yeah.
Tanana Reeves' stories, which are horror, thriller, sci-fi, her characters are Black, but they often are this sort of, they're Black, they happen to be Black. She's working in a Black universe.
Yeah.
But it's not this sort of, it isn't always woke horror or social justice horror. These are stories like there's a monster in the lake, and there's a Black woman who's got to figure out what's going on in the lake, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate her work, and she does that. And as you said, Chad, 100% we need that. And 100%, I'm a very, very proud Black woman. And I love to be hailed in my media, in my neighborhood. And so, happen to be Black, yes. And full on, we up here and we Black. I love them both.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I was just going to add just two little quick things to that. I was going to say, to quote the great late Dwayne McDuffie, he always said, he didn't make Static like to be, oh yeah, he's a superhero. And he's a Black superhero. He made him to be, he was a teenager who got superheroes. And his story was about being a teenager, being a nerd, going through high school, getting bullied. But he just happened to be Black. So that way, he was saying anybody who's in that category can relate to this character besides race, sexuality, whatever, religion, because it's a relatable character.
Yes.
And then to draw back to your other point, Chad, one show I love, and I'm so angry that it ended so abruptly, was Lovecraft Country. And with that show, they play off of both ends because they'll give you a horror thing, like they'll take the actual stereotypical characters that they use, and they made those into horrific monsters that were chasing the girl. And then they'll give you something like her mother, Hippolyta, who went through this little change and she found this area and she became a great warrior. She became an empress in the future who could do whatever she wanted. And then she came back with this knowledge. And in the end, they prevailed. And it's just, you see all these characters as they do prevail, it's still at the same time. Yes, remember, they are in the 1950s. They do have to deal with the real world horrors and the supernatural stuff, but they still are empowered and still are doing this. And when you blend those together, you can get your cake and eat it too. That's one of the great examples to use for what you were talking about, Chad. And I had to get that out because it came in my head and I was like, oh, let me get it out.
Chad, I will confess something though. There is something that is hard for me because we're the ones that talk about incidental Blackness, right? We just happen to be Black and show up, and that we want that, and that's powerful. And I don't have like data on this, but at the same time, it feels like we're the only people that are having that conversation because there is no such thing as incidental whiteness. White representations, as an example, are very intentional. Right? The ways in which we talk about white culture, we show the diversity. It's not, we just happened to cast. Friends, we didn't just happen to cast 5 or half dozen white people in New York. Those things are intentional.
Yep.
So I still struggle with it a little bit, to be honest with you, Chad, because am I the only one talking about, it would be great if we just happen to have these, it's almost colorblind casting and we get Black folks. I do want to be intentional. I do want to be purposefully included and shown up in the way that Marcus is talking about Lovecraft Country and that disruption of the story and an intentional casting of Blackness. Yeah, because otherwise we see people lose their minds, like over The Little Mermaid.
And that is a great example.
So
yes. And in things like that, I agree. It's like I agree with both of the intentionality and just we're just happen to be here. But when the thing that I struggle with too, because I think about a lot of the same things, because some media is definitely intentional. Like you were just talking about The Wire. We have shows like Empire. We have shows like Power, shows like that. But at the same time, I would like to be intentional, but subvert expectation. That's
Ooh,
the thing. I
nice.
don't want, we don't
Yes.
always have to be the rapper or the drug dealer or,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
the one thing that I love, and I'm gonna give an example, and I talk about this every episode almost, but I love Donald Glover's Atlanta. I love it so much because on the surface level, the show is about a rapper trying to make it.
Yes.
But you wouldn't get that when you actually watch the show and that it's a black sci-fi show.
Yes,
And they rarely,
definitely.
you never see
Right.
the titular rapper, you never see him rap once.
Never.
It's been,
You just hear it.
it's been
He
four
just shows
seasons.
It's
up or whatever. He
implied.
has a concert.
Yeah,
or
or
whatever, and
even
like
off
they go
the
do.
stage. Never see him actually rap.
Exactly. And that, Dr. Coleman, that's what I want more of. I want to have something to where it's just we're not, that goes back and forth again with that, okay, we're being represented, but is it in a progressive way or is it
Yes.
regressive? So my thing is I'm not Ghost. I'm not an angry drug dealer. I cannot rap. Like I'm not that athletic. So it's just like but it's like, where's the show for these other black people that completely exist? And that's where I'm at with it. And like when you talk
But
about,
and also to your point, isn't also a moment. As much as I loved Hidden Figures, it's not just it's our moment of historical drama. You want to see it all the time, right? You want it to be normalized, not exceptional. And that's what I think what we're talking about. Now, my favorite Atlanta episode is the character's name went out of my head, but because Marcus, you were talking about doing hair, and you can see where this is coming, where there's a diversity in the room talking about the creation. It's the scene where he's going to get his hair cut, and he only has half his hair cut, and then he's going to switch barbers, and like that.
Man, look.
Talk about Blackity Black. That is a Blackity Black episode. It's a whole episode just about that. And it is the funniest, smartest thing on television.
It completely. And that's just what I want more of. And another conversation is about talking about intention. You mentioned us in sci-fi, right? Us in these kind of, you talked about The Little Mermaid, you talked about Star Wars. So answer this. Why is it, I think I brought this to you guys the other day, Marcus and Demetrius, why is it that we just simply don't really have a place in science fiction and fantasy? Certainly not fantasy, because every single fantasy, the big ones, Harry Potter,
oh man,
they're all Eurocentric.
Yeah,
they're all Eurocentric.
It's never anything in the motherland.
No
hot sun, no pyramids, and it's oh man. Even with sci-fi, when I was growing up, I loved Star Wars to death. I was like, really? It's only 5 black people in the whole galaxy. We got like aliens and big furry dogs and stuff. We got like 5 black people. So yeah, it's definitely.
So before I answer, Demetrius, what did you say? To Chad's point.
About I was gonna say. So you're talking about like getting far away from stereotypes. Is what I was gonna add to your point. So just having not the drug dealer, not the pimps, not those kind of things, and getting to the common folk people, the people that aren't doing those things, the guys that are just like they got normal jobs, they do regular things. And then I was gonna say about the Star Wars thing is like growing up, we had like literally Lando, like that's all we had. And then we got Finn, and they crap. When me and Marcus were talking about it on our last podcast, they crapped the bed with that.
Don't forget about Mace though. Don't forget.
Mace that dude.
I ain't gonna forget about Mace, Samuel Jackson. Dude, but they for 3 movies teased him being a Jedi and then didn't deliver, and it made me so mad about it. Because all you had to do was just drop it in one of the movies. It started off in one of the movies, and you just teased it, and you gave us a Lego series with him being a Jedi. Oh, come on now. Crap.
Yeah, and Demetrius, that just go back to what we were saying in the very beginning of this podcast about they just put us there, and then it's for nothing basically, because it's okay. John Boyega even talk about they put you on they put me on the poster. I was like, oh yeah, and blah blah blah. Then people saw it and it was like, oh, that's it. Oh, he's just a black stormtrooper that defected, and that was it. When you could tell it was there, but they didn't push it. They
And here's
pushed
the
what
crazy
the
thing.
norm was.
Felt like it was left on the cutting room floor.
Yes, and you
I
could
really
tell.
feel like I wanted to say, where's the stuff? You all
Yeah.
left this out. I know
Yeah.
there's more here.
The crazy thing, they dropped in the last movie, they dropped in another stormtrooper who was a black girl or whatever, and
There you
did
go.
nothing with her character in that movie.
Nothing.
That's
I
right.
was like, why? Why did you add her to not have her? What, she had what, a handful of lines, and then she did nothing? Come on now, like, you got to show up better than that. That'd be
You know,
making
they
me
lost
mad.
me when they unmasked Darth Vader, and when it wasn't James Earl Jones,
Oh yeah.
does not match the voice at all.
He was talking all different. I was like, so where's that suave you had a minute ago?
Where'd he go?
Where's
Right.
that dignity you have to?
Right.
Right?
So, Chad, in the 90s, this might surprise you, and I haven't done a follow-up on this. In the late 90s, I did audience studies and asked a question about, and I didn't use the language of Afrofuturism. I didn't use the language of sci-fi. I didn't use the language of fantasy, but asked about or gave examples of those kinds of texts. And it was really interesting because these were all Black participants, and this was some time ago, and they really talked about appreciating media that was rooted in the reality of today, right? That's what they could identify with. And I've thought a lot about those data, and I could have asked more questions. The study wasn't about that, but people started to talk about that. And I said, what could you imagine? And I think what's one participant said that was interesting was that it was hard to imagine that fantasy requires us to imagine a world, for example, that's absent, in their example, whiteness or white supremacy or those histories. And what does that look like? What does a world without that sort of root of conflict look like? How do you write that? How do you construct an entire world without that? Because Derek Bell does this, W.E.B. Du Bois does this, but in each of those cases, they are still responding to racism. So how do you create a narrative also that sort of targets Blacks in the U.S., absent a history that they know so well? Both Bell and Du Bois are talking about a world where kind of white people, we think they disappear and then they're not really gone, but what happens when like it's just one person left, or and we have trouble with that. I would, if I told you right now, try to create a world where we thrive, but is absent the kind of racial conflict that we're so used to in those histories. It takes us a minute to describe that.
Yeah.
Like white people get swapped out for like blue people, but it'll still be like a metaphor for whiteness.
Yeah.
And to that point, and you brought up a great point, and like I was saying, in order to do that, it just comes off as, like I said, it's just not realistic, and we can't really connect, you could say. When I hear things about
that,
that,
think it takes work.
Yes.
Yeah.
And our incremental step is Black Panther in a lot of ways. It sort of shows. And I can't wait to see what happens with this almost 3-hour long.
Oh, Lord.
Right.
They got a lot to say.
Yeah.
Right, they got a lot of stuff to unpack.
I'm just standing by my guess. That's not Shuri in the Black
There
Panther.
you go.
Yeah, I'm
not gonna go there.
You're like the only one.
Wait, I need in on this. Go there just a little bit.
He swear up and down that Shuri is not the one in the suit at the end of the trailer.
So.
But they put the dots like she wore the war paint on her face.
Then why is the trailer hiding it? Show her putting on the uniform.
No.
You know what, Chad?
I'm
not doing it. I'm not doing it.
Give me the person you think then. Give me the person you think then. If it's not her,
it might be Okoye.
Okay, fair. Okay.
That's fair. I'll give you that.
That's fair. That's
I'll
fair.
give you that.
Yeah, I can give you that.
I can do you one better though. They're gonna throw a curveball at you, and it's gonna come off, and it's gonna be the beautiful and elegant Angela Bassett. No, I'm just kidding. They probably won't do that. That's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I really want. But you know, a brother just got a dream sometimes. That's all. That's what I want. Really.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my God! That like Marcus would be in the theater, like, told y'all.
I told you.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Chad, I have made you lose control of your interview. I am so sorry.
It's okay. No, this is like literally how it is all the time.
It's how it works. We just
it's
spitball
all
wherever we
fun.
go. It just kind of does this thing.
But one of the things, just to get back to your point about that world that we're talking about here, I also love historical fiction. I'm a huge fan of that also. And I think of media like Bridgerton. I think of media that has a lot of Afro-Black characters. And I also think a lot about historical fiction like Anne Boleyn, for instance, where they had a Black actress portray Anne. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on that kind of media, and would that be something that you would like to see more of, or do you think that's something that
There's a horror film. Oh, the type. Look, you have me up way past my bedtime because I get up super early. There's a horror film, and it's set. It's World War II, and the Nazis are experimenting and have created these monsters. But what's really interesting, and who's in it? I think Bokeem Woodbine's in it for a minute. Spoiler, but they create all of the Black soldiers or leads, the heroes, all of the officers are Black, and it disrupts the depiction, that sort of Saving Private Ryan and what heroism looks like, what Black contributions look like. So what's great about this movie is I've shown it. Dang it, what is this movie called? So somebody needs to Google this for me, because if I do it, I might disconnect us. But it's a horror. Let me see. It's a horror movie. I think Bokeem Woodbine is in it.
I was about to say a horror. Bokeem Woodbine. What is it? You said World War II?
Yeah, but it's recent. It's fairly recent.
Yeah. Let's see. I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
So what I love about this it's definitely historical fiction, is that I've shown this. And later, my students have written about this in a different context, in a serious way, and talked about how Black people showed up during the war. And so this has disrupted, right, the narrative that people, because this generation of students are like, there were Black officers leading white troops, right? Like, how could there not be? I love that. I love what this movie did. I love this generation and the assumption that, okay, yeah, Black folks were doing that, right? And that it wasn't segregated, was it? It couldn't have been. They were in charge. So there's Overlord. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. Cool. That's it. I love that movie. Overlord is good. And so there's a disruption. It gets at your kind of, we just show up. But it's a lot like what you said about Lovecraft Country, Marcus, where it's an intentional disruption. And I think that's really cool. And I'm okay with folks being a little bit confused about when and how Black people contributed to the war.
Yes.
No, so I definitely agree. I would love to see more of that as well. And Dr. Coleman, we definitely don't mean to keep you up too much. Like you're saying, past your bedtime, we definitely respect your time. But one of the last things I wanted to ask you, because just you study a lot in film and in media, and we all know that industry is built off of guaranteed money. Basically, you spend all these money on these movies, somebody need to go watch it. But at the end of the day, outside of and guys, don't start, because I'm gonna bring them up, but outside of the Transformers, the Fast and Furious world, all of that good stuff, how would you So like I said, we talk about this all the time. So outside of these types of guaranteed money movies, what would need to happen in order to just have more of ourselves and not just Black people, just movies for us, by us, more movies with Asian culture, just all of these that take a peek into something outside of what we're used to, what film has been, what horror has been, the horror that made us the other. Like outside of Jordan Peele, how do we just keep getting these creators funded and making movies and making them profitable? What does that look like for you?
So the big sociological answer is we have to disrupt white supremacy, because that's the barrier. That's the sort of elephant in the room hurdle, is that we have to disrupt the notion that our stories aren't valuable, that people won't show up for them. I was just struck that Ice Cube recently talked about how he tried to, I think it was Friday.
Friday.
One of the Friday
I seen that.
series. And even after a string of hits, like Ice Cube couldn't, and they're money makers. He couldn't convince people to greenlight it, or that you had to have Jordan Peele with a kind of breakthrough moment with Get Out. And so remember, I said everything is cyclical. So you've got this breakthrough with Get Out, and now you see studios scrambling to either recast low quality films that didn't have any folks of color in them, and then now they're shooting them in there like a Nerf gun, right?
Literally.
Or they're funding lower budget, they're not investing lower budget projects. And that's how we got the blaxploitation era in the first place. That it wasn't, it's like they blamed us for blaxploitation, but really what it was, an underfund, a lack of investment in our media products and our stories. We didn't have it. William Crane's story about getting Blackula made is just riveting, and what he had to do to get this movie made and what it would have looked. And even today, we still haven't learned. Where are we at with the Blade movie? What are we on, our second?
Just talked
third
about this
director?
last
We
podcast.
literally just talked
Literally
about
talked
this.
about
With an Academy, we have an Academy Award winner in the movie, and
Come on,
still
man.
a hot mess.
Come on,
So that's what has to happen first. It's Chris is right. He pointed to us. It's the gatekeepers moving them out the way. To move them out the way, we need to also move out the way the barriers that call into question our value.
Because here's the thing. I said it last podcast. But without Blade, we wouldn't even have the whole cinematic universe that is here now. So they need to pay the respect that it's due and stop playing with Blade.
I think so.
Yes.
I agree.
Thank you.
100%.
I just have to get that out every
You
single
good,
time on a
bro? You
podcast.
good.
Whenever anybody brings out Blade, I have to say that because it's so important for people to understand that.
Yes.
No,
That,
it,
Yeah, Wesley
without us
Snipes
showing up.
makes your point is, let's put a finer point on it. So that Blade series, it's the first. Wesley Snipes, it's like when we had sitcoms on UPN and WB. UPN and WB were these startup networks, and to build them up so that they were no longer startups, they went to black folks, and they did black shows until they got their legs under them, and then they abandoned us. Marvel did right, they did the same thing with Blade, but don't forget, in between there's the Blade TV series starring Sticky Fingers.
I remember
Yep,
that.
there you go,
I remember
right.
that. I remember that. Yeah.
Right. So there is still not a lot of money put into that, but it was still a really good show. So we've got a track record in the same way that Ice Cube was saying, how much more do we need to prove that there's an audience for this, right? That as Demetrius said, why do we just keep getting the Lego movie? Why aren't we on the big screen? How much more do we have to prove ourselves?
Yes.
Exactly.
We will not be the Lego movie, Demetrius.
No, we will not.
that's what I'm talking about.
Oh man.
Not at all. Not at all. But I think it's really important, and once again, that's why I think it's amazing that you were able to join us tonight, because we love having these conversations with people that are really passionate about it, and definitely titans of these industries, and just really, like I said, getting that connection and getting that representation out there. Like I said, for myself, I do so many things with getting the representation of Black scientists out there and showing little kids that, hey, you can do this. There are people out here that look like you. So they don't have to have the similar situation that I had back in the 90s when I didn't have that representation out there. But for you, Dr. Coleman, we just want to thank you so much for just being such a force and getting that representation out there and moving that conversation forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for letting me hang out with you all tonight.
No
for being here.
problem. It is an honor. It is.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Definitely. And you're more than welcome to come back at any time. And before we head out, the biggest thing we just want you to do is, this is your spotlight. So just let, all of our viewers and listeners know where they can find you, if you would like to be found on social media, and what you have going on right now.
So I will say, yes, I was happy to be seen. I'm happy to be found. I have a book coming out November 1st. It's the second edition to Horror Noir, the book. And the first edition came out in 2011. So we've learned a lot about Black horror since then. And I would say it brings us up to date, up to I actually sprinkle in the word nope in there. So
Nice.
that's happening. And then February 7th. This one is exciting. It's new. It's called The Black Eye Dies First. My co-author is Mark Harris. This is a book that's coming out. This is a commercial book. This isn't a textbook. It's funny. And Mark is a brilliant, funny, comedic writer. He's a famous film critic and horror fan and has the website blackhorrormovies.com. So we have a book coming out February 7th. It's already being promoted. It's going to be huge. So be on the lookout for those. And then on a more serious side, a scholarly side, in the spring, I have a book coming out that's edited. And this one is looking at how Blackness is defined in horror movies outside of the US, outside of the West. So what does it mean to create a Black horror movie in the Sudan when you're not talking about Blackness in this way? So what does that look like? How does it get talked about? How is it legible? So those three things are happening.
Oh wow, that is definitely
You know what this means, Chad? You got a lot of homework to do, brother.
Oh man, I got so much.
He does.
I got so much homework to do. Just before the podcast, me and my brother, because he unfortunately couldn't be with us tonight, but he did help me prepare a lot for this podcast. We have your book. We've been reading and going, definitely doing our due diligence. So I got a lot more. I got a lot more to do for the second time around.
All right, so I'm gonna hold you to it. I'm going to bed. You will read the books when they come out, and then hopefully you'll have me back.
All right, sure will.
Yes,
Definitely will. Dr. Coleman, it was a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your night. And for all of our viewers and listeners out there, you already know this is the Square Roundtable Podcast, and we are out.
Peace.
Good night.